In a world that's increasingly bizarre, one question remains. What's really going on? Join us on The Daily Absurd as we delve into the strange corners of reality, exploring the stories that make you scratch your head and say, is this real life?
All right, buckle up, because today we're diving into one of those bizarre conflicts you've probably never heard of. The Great Emu War of 1932 in Australia. We've got Wikipedia entries, an article from Atlas Obscura, and one from Unseen History, all covering this very unusual event. It's a story of struggling farmers, a sudden influx of 20,000 emus, causing agricultural chaos, and the government deciding to respond with, wait for it, the military?
Yeah, you heard that right, the military. It seems almost comical now, but at the time this was a serious issue.
So let's unpack this a bit. We're talking post-World War I Australia. The Great Depression's in full swing. And these farmers, many of whom are veterans who were given land after the war, are already struggling to make ends meet. Then these massive flocks of emus arrive, wreaking havoc on their wheat crops.
It wasn't just a few birds here and there. Imagine thousands of emus, some standing nearly 6 feet tall, migrating inland after breeding season, and deciding that the farmer's cultivated land is an ideal habitat.
And they weren't just eating the crops right. I read that they were also trampling them, breaking fences, and basically making it easier for other pests, like rabbits, to get in and cause further damage.
Exactly. It was a recipe for disaster. These emus could cover vast distances, making it nearly impossible for the farmers to keep them out. They appealed to the government for help, and their response was, well, quite unexpected.
Sending in the army, armed with Lewis machine guns, the same kind used in World War I. It seems a bit extreme, to say the least.
It does, doesn't it? But the Minister of Defense at the time, Sir George Pierce, was surprisingly receptive to the idea. There were various reasons given, from providing target practice for the soldiers to appeasing the frustrated farmers. Some historians even suggest that there might have been political motivations at play, with the government wanting to be seen supporting Western Australia amidst growing secession movements, essentially groups advocating for the state to break away from Australia.
So in November 1932, the Emu War begins. Did they at least achieve some early success with this unusual strategy?
Initially, yes. There were reports of a few dozen emus being killed in the first engagements. But as the campaign progressed, it became clear that the military had severely underestimated their feathered foe.
I can only imagine the scene. Soldiers with machine guns, trying to outmaneuver these large, flightless birds that could outrun a truck. It almost sounds like something out of a Looney Tunes cartoon.
The reality wasn't too far off. Accounts from the time describe emus scattering unpredictably, the truck-mounted machine gun failing because of the rough terrain, and the birds seeming almost unfazed by the bullets. One major even compared the emus to Zulus and tanks, highlighting the unexpected challenge they posed.
It's no wonder this story quickly gained attention, even reaching international newspapers in the UK. I bet the coverage was a wild mix of concern for the farmers and amusement at the Army's struggles.
Absolutely. The Emu War became a media sensation. You had newspapers reporting on the battle between man and bird, and even conservationists in the UK voicing their concerns about the impact of the cull on the emu population. This bizarre event captured the public imagination, with the emus being portrayed as this formidable force standing up to the might of the Australian Army. The media attention certainly added to the story's mystique, but amidst the humor, it's important to remember that this was a genuine struggle for the farmers trying to protect their livelihoods. So what happened next? The military ultimately withdrew after about a month. Right?
That's right. Despite thousands of rounds fired, the emu cull had a minimal impact on the overall population. The Emu War, as it came to be known, was deemed a failure. I'm curious, though, did the farmers simply resign themselves to living with the emus and the damage they caused?
Not quite. While the military campaign was short-lived and ultimately unsuccessful, the Emu War did bring the issue of emu management to the forefront. It forced the government to consider more sustainable solutions.
So what did they do? What other options were there besides deploying soldiers with machine guns?
Well, there was already a system in place since 1923, a bounty system.
A bounty system. So the government was paying people to hunt emus. How did that work exactly?
Yes, essentially. It incentivized people to control the emu population by offering a financial reward for each emu killed. And surprisingly, it proved to be far more effective than the military intervention. In 1934 alone, over 57,000 emu bounties were claimed.
That's a significant number.
Yeah.
It sounds like a more practical approach than sending in the army, But were there any downsides to this bounty system?
There were definitely concerns. Some argued that it encouraged indiscriminate killing and could potentially lead to overhunting. There were also questions about how the system was managed and whether it was truly sustainable in the long run.
It sounds like a bit of a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Effective in reducing emu numbers, but with the potential for negative consequences as well.
Yeah.
So is this bounty system still in place today?
No, the bounty system was eventually phased out. But the Emu War and the subsequent focus on emu management led to another, perhaps even more significant development: exclusion fencing.
Fencing? I'm imagining a simple barbed wire fence. Surely an emu could just step over that. What made these fences different?
These weren't your typical farm fences. These were specialized exclusion fences designed specifically to keep emus and other animals like dingoes and rabbits out of agricultural areas. They were much taller and sturdier than traditional fences and strategically placed to create barriers across vast stretches of land.
So in a way, the Emu War, despite its failures, inadvertently paved the way for a more sustainable solution.
Yeah.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? This bizarre military campaign, which was widely ridiculed, ultimately pushed people to find a more effective and less combative way to deal with human-wildlife conflict.
It certainly highlights the importance of learning from our mistakes. Sometimes the most obvious solution, like deploying the military, isn't the best one, and often it takes a bit of trial and error and even some unexpected events to figure out what truly works.
The Emu War might seem like a humorous footnote in history, but it really does offer some valuable insights into the complexities of managing human-wildlife interactions. It's a story that's both funny and thought-provoking, reminding us that our relationship with nature requires careful consideration and a willingness to adapt our approaches.
I completely agree. It raises some important questions about how we perceive and interact with the natural world. Are there lessons we can learn from this event that might help us address similar challenges today? Challenges that might not involve emus, but still require us to find a balance between human needs and the needs of wildlife.
That's a great point. It seems like the Emu War, for all its absurdity, can serve as a valuable case study in what not to do and what we can learn from past mistakes.
Exactly. It reminds us that simple solutions to complex problems rarely exist, and that understanding animal behavior, considering the ecological consequences of our actions, and embracing innovation are crucial when dealing with human-wildlife conflict.
So the next time we hear about a conflict between humans and wildlife, whether it's urban sprawl encroaching on animal habitats or competition for resources, maybe we should all take a moment to think back to the Emu War and consider the lessons it offers.
It's a reminder that we need to approach these situations with a deeper understanding of the animals involved, seek collaborative solutions that benefit both sides, and perhaps most importantly, learn from the mistakes of the past.
It's been fascinating unpacking this strange and surprisingly insightful event. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Great Emu War. We hope you've enjoyed this journey through history and found it as enlightening as we have. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and as always, stay curious. It's funny to think about soldiers trying to fight emus with machine guns, but as we've been discussing, there are some serious takeaways here about human-wildlife conflict, even in the 21st century.
Yeah, it's easy to just dismiss the Emu War as just like a quirky historical anecdote. But it really does offer some valuable lessons for how we approach similar challenges today. We might not be deploying troops against wildlife anymore, but those core issues, like competition for resources, habitat encroachment, and our understanding of animal behavior, are just as relevant.
Absolutely. So instead of those extreme measures,
Yeah.
what can we learn from the emu situation and how it was ultimately handled?
Well, for starters, the Emu War highlights the importance of understanding animal behavior. The Australian military went into that situation with a very limited understanding of how these birds would react. They assumed it would be a simple matter of force, but the emus' agility and adaptability completely surprised them.
It does seem like they underestimated the emus' instincts for survival. I mean, in their defense, I'm not sure anyone could have predicted just how resilient those birds would be against machine guns.
Well, today, we have access to a wealth of scientific knowledge about animal behavior and ecology. And by studying and truly understanding the animals we're dealing with, we can develop more effective and humane methods of managing conflict. It's not about viewing wildlife as the enemy, but rather as cohabitants of our planet.
So instead of focusing on eradication or control, we should be looking for ways to coexist, finding solutions that benefit both humans and the animals involved.
Precisely. Things like habitat restoration, creating wildlife corridors to allow animals to move safely between areas, and even simply educating people about how to live alongside wildlife can go a long way in preventing conflict in the first place.
Those solutions certainly seem more likely to succeed in the long term. than, say, a war against emus. But besides understanding animal behavior, what other lessons can we draw from this unusual historical event?
Well, the Emu War also highlights the need for collaboration and innovative thinking. Imagine if back in 1932, the farmers and the government had brought together a more diverse team to tackle this emu issue. Farmers, scientists, conservationists, maybe even indigenous Australians with their traditional knowledge of emu behavior, all working together to find a solution.
A multifaceted approach. That considers the problem from multiple angles. I can see how that would have been far more effective.
Exactly. By pooling their expertise, they might have come up with a more creative and sustainable solution right from the start. Perhaps something like the exclusion fencing that was eventually adopted.
The Emu War, for all its absurdity, really does offer a valuable case study, reminding us that simple solutions to complex problems are rare. It's a story that encourages us to think differently, embrace collaboration, and approach human-wildlife interactions with a bit more humility.
I couldn't agree more. It's a reminder that learning from the past, even the seemingly silly parts of history, can help us navigate the complex relationship between humans and the natural world.
What a fascinating deep dive this has been. We started with a seemingly comical story about soldiers fighting emus and ended up uncovering some important insights about conservation, understanding animal behavior, and the need for creative solutions to human-wildlife conflict.
Yeah, it just goes to show that history is full of surprises, and that even the most unexpected events can offer valuable lessons for the present.
So for all of you listening out there, the next time you hear about a human-wildlife conflict, take a moment to remember the Emu War. Consider the lessons it offers, and ask yourselves, are we truly understanding the animals involved? Are we looking for collaborative solutions that benefit both sides? And most importantly, are we learning from the mistakes of the past?
And if you ever find yourself face-to-face with an emu, perhaps offering it some grain might be a better approach than reaching for a machine gun.
Until next time, keep diving deep, stay curious, and maybe learn a thing or two from those feathered veterans of the Great Emu War.
Thanks for listening to The Daily Absurd. If you enjoyed the ride, make sure to like, subscribe, and share the absurdity. See you next time.